Hello 10x2, sorry I can't be with you today, but owing to the fact that we've lost a few lessons, I'm going to be with you in video form and I'm going to talk you through the dominant portion of Act 4 Scene 1, lines 98 onwards, which is where we were up to in class. However, I do just want to start with a quick reflection on Claudio's dialogue a little bit earlier. So this is on page 66 and it's lines 29 to 41. So I'm looking here at Claudio's speech. We've already read it, so I'm not going to talk about the language here. But just looking at this, I can tell something significant about the way he's expressing himself. So just looking at this section of dialogue, I can see that does it look like a paragraph or a poem? Does it rhyme? If I count the beats or syllables in the last few lines, how many beats or syllables will there be? Well, I can say that it definitely looks like a poem as opposed to a paragraph. So this is not prose, okay? So when it looks like a paragraph, it's in prose. And that's the dominant form of expression in comedy conventionally. I can see here that it doesn't rhyme. Thankfulness, again, friend, honour, here, truth, withal. There's no rhyme going on here. I can also see in the last two lines that each one has 10 beats. She knows the heat of a luxurious bed. Her blush is guiltiness, not modesty. So what does this tell me? Well, hopefully some of you have guessed it already. It tells me that Claudio is speaking in blank verse. Now, this is significant in a comedy, probably more so than in a tragedy, because characters don't do it very often. Why is he speaking in blank verse? Potentially to remind Leonato of his status. He is too good for Hero. Potentially he's speaking in blank verse because this is a very emotional point in the play for Claudio, and blank verse is the manner in which you express yourself if you have deep or kind of thoughtful emotions. It also elevates the importance of what he's saying, as if this kind of epiphany, this revelation he's having about Hero is something that's important to everybody. So as we go through the remainder of Act 4 Scene 1, do look out for any other speeches which seem to be crafted in blank verse and reflect briefly, why is that? So this is where we were up to in class. I'm going to read through the dialogue on the screen and then I'm going to talk you through the language. Claudio says, O hero, what a hero hadst thou been, if half thy outward graces had been placed about thy thoughts and counsels of thy heart. But fare thee well, most foul, most fair. Farewell, thou pure impiety and impious purity. For thee I will lock up all the gates of love, and on my eyelids shall conjecture hang, to turn all beauty into thoughts of harm, and never shall it more be gracious. Leonato responds, hath no man's dagger here a point for me? And at hearing that, Hero swoons, and Beatrice cries out, why, how now, cousin? Wherefore sink you down? Don John at this point interjects, come, let us go. These things come thus to light, smother her spirits up. And Don Pedro, Don John, and Claudio leave the stage. Well, if we pick out the anaphora here, most foul, most fair, this actually predates Macbeth. It's a very famous allusion to Macbeth when we usually talk about foul and fair. But it predates the description of the witches in Macbeth. So this reuse of the phrase kind of foreshadows how the witches will be portrayed and therefore makes us think about Hero in a certain light, that she is somebody who has an ambiguity to her now, Claudia, almost a kind of mysticism that she's been able to kind of hide who she is behind some kind of manipulation. So you can see he really does feel strongly about Hero's superficial goodness. He refers to it as pure impiety and impious purity, and this antithesis describes her purity as that deception. He then makes a promise for the future, which is also called a commissive. He says, for thee, for you, I'll lock up all the gates of love. And all the way through the play so far, Claudio has been this great lover, this character who embodies courtly love, and he's saying now he rejects that identity. He's going to have to become somebody new because of what Hero has done to him. Having heard this really horrible characterization of his daughter, Leonato calls out the rhetorical question, "Hath no man's dagger here a point for me?" which tells us he feels so humiliated that he wishes he would die. And on hearing on how much she has shamed her father, Hero at this point passes out. So the verb swoons demonstrates her kinesics, her body language. She's falling to the floor. And this, I suppose, is the only real good way to protest if you're maintaining a modest persona. You can't shout, you can't argue, so fainting is probably her best protest. Beatrice is really upset by this. She calls out, "Wherefore," which means why sink you down? So you can see Beatrice is very moved, very upset by what's happening to Hero, even though Don Pedro and Claudio do not seem to care. They literally leave at the point in which she is prostrate upon the floor. So you can see how much those characters have changed to be so cruel at that point. The cruelty of Don Pedro, Don John, and Claudio is strongly juxtaposed with the reaction of Benedict, who replies with, "How doth the lady?" And this interrogative tells us how much Benedict has changed, that he cares. He's a new person, having received or feeling like he's received Beatrice's love. And we start to work out that perhaps his loyalties are a little bit more complicated now. Beatrice calls out, "Dead, I think. Help, uncle. Hero, why Hero? Uncle, Signor Benedict, Friar," all those exclamatives. She's really upset. Leonato, "O fate, take not away thy heavy hand. Death is the fairest cover for her shame that may be wished for." Beatrice calls out, "How now, cousin Hero?" But Friar Francis is not moved, so the priest says, "Have comfort, lady." And Leonato is shocked by this. He shouts at his daughter on the floor, "Dost thou look up?" And Friar Francis, again unmoved, very calm, "Yeah, wherefore should she not?" So the metaphor here highlighted in yellow, "Death is the fairest cover for her shame," tells us that Leonato now desires his own daughter's death. The friar is really surprised by this, and when Leonato calls out, "Dost thou look up?" what he means is, do you want to go to heaven? So he's saying to Hero, who's fainted on the floor, do you want to go to heaven? He's implying that she's damned. But Friar Francis does not agree. He is a much more kind of careful, meditative individual. He's not having the knee-jerk emotional reaction that Leonato is having. He is a much more kind of, well, a faithful character, I suppose. So Leonato's emotional reaction is strongly juxtaposed by the meditative, calm response of the friar. However, the friar's calmness has not managed to transfer itself to Leonato. At this point, he has one of the most famous speeches in the play, which is incredibly kind of steeped in patriarchal values. So you can see here I've highlighted some key lines. The first one being, "Do not live, Hero." So he says, "Wherefore? Why doth not every earthly thing cry shame upon her? Could she here deny the story that is printed in her blood? Do not live, Hero. Do not ope thine eyes. For did I think thou wouldst not quickly die, thought I thy spirit were stronger than thy shames, myself would, on the rearward of reproaches, strike at thy life. Grieved I had but one. Chid I for that at frugal nature's frame. Oh, one too much by thee. Why had I one? Why ever wast thou lovely in mine eyes?" So the first imperative here, well, we've got a sequence of two actually. Do not live, Hero. Do not open thine eyes. It's him literally screaming, shouting at his daughter, who is still fainted on the floor, telling her to die. So the cruelty of Leonato's action here is really kind of emphasized by what Hero is doing. He then goes on to say, that he would kill Hero, he would strike at her life if he could avoid the rearward of reproaches. So you can see that's emphasized by alliteration, rearward of reproaches. What he's frightened of here is regret. He's already knowing at this point that at some point he would come to regret hurting his daughter. He's got that in the back of his mind. He's just trying to repress it because of the anger that's sort of welling up inside him at this point. We have a series of rhetorical questions, and one of them, or two of them here, are about him previously wishing he had more children. Grieved I had but one. Chid I for that at frugal nature's frame. These rhetorical questions tell us that previously he wanted more children, but now, in this exclamative, one too much by thee, you can see that he wishes he had no children. So he's changed. This is a point of a transformation for Leonato's character. The speech continues with another rhetorical question. So we've got a real pattern of these within this speech. He asks, why had I not, with charitable hand, took up a beggar's issue at my gates, who smirched thus and mired with infamy? I might have said, no part of it is mine. This shame derives itself from unknown loins. This rhetorical question is a little bit tricky because of the language, but essentially Leonato is wishing he'd adopted a beggar's child, a beggar's issue, so that he could, when it disappointed him like Hero has, he could disown it. He could say, no part of it is mine. So you can see at this point, he's not just wishing he had no children. He's wishing that he had no children of his own, because all children disappoint you. So you need to be prepared for that. There's a real cynicism now that Leonato has. And perhaps this is because of how he felt about Hero before. So you've got repetition of the possessive pronoun mine. But mine, and mine I loved, and mine I praised, and mine that I was proud on, mine so much that I myself was to myself not mine. So initially, you can see highlighted in green here, he's saying how much he loved her. She was an object, yes, mine, a possession, but she was something that he absolutely felt really strongly about. But now he's worried that the love he had for Hero was actually damaging to him. He was mine so much that I myself was to myself not mine. He loved Hero so much that he felt he belonged almost to her. There's almost a kind of perturbing romantic connotation here, almost like he is the one who has been cuckolded by Hero's actions. And I think that's something that's worth pointing out if you're really interested in the subtle linguistic details here. The technique here is something called chiasmus, which is a cyclical linguistic structure where we start on one phrase and we kind of cycle back to it. Mine so much that I myself was to myself, not mine. If you think about it, it's kind of a circle to the linguistic structure of that utterance. Leonato then goes on to use the metaphor. Oh, she is fallen into a pit of ink that the wide sea hath dropped too few to wash her clean again. And whilst this might seem like quite a complex metaphor, it's actually got a very clear meaning. She's got a ruined reputation. There's nothing that will solve it. And whilst that sounds a little bit dramatic, there is nothing as hyperbolic and dysphomistic as the last line of his speech. He calls her foul tainted flesh. So this is emphasized by alliteration. I would certainly suggest that this is a dysphomism. It's like the worst possible way to describe something. That's what a dysphomism is. He's here just calling his daughter meat. She's not even an object. She is consumable matter, matter that goes off. Like there's something incredibly repulsive about the way he describes Hero here, and it's because Hero repulses him. He's disgusted by his daughter. So this is a profoundly angry and upsetting speech full of emotion, full of his kind of reflections on his ruined status through Hero. And that's why it's in blank verse, for the most part. Leonato's speech is followed by a real contrast. Benedict says, "Sir, sir, be patient. For my part, I'm so attired in wonder, I know not what to say." And what Benedict is doing here is he's having a really sensible, logical response. He's not emotive, he's not reactionary, he is thinking first before he speaks. So you can see with Benedict here, we're really positioned alongside him. We appreciate the fact that he isn't jumping to judge Hero. So he's becoming even more of our hero and our protagonist in this scene, despite the fact that he's not the one with all the big long speeches. He is the person who is reacting the way we'd want somebody to react to a lie and to slander. Beatrice also responds in a way which evokes our sort of affection. So you can see in this exclamative, "My cousin is belied." Beatrice is loyal to Hero. She immediately works out the truth. The verb tells us, belied, that she knows that this is all slander, this is all made up. Benedict asks Beatrice, "Lady, were you Hero's bedfellow last night?" And Beatrice responds, "No, truly not. Although until last night I have this 12-month for an entire year been her bedfellow." And Leonato takes this as proof. "Confirmed, confirmed. Oh, that is stronger made, which was before barred up with ribs of iron. Would the two princes lie, and Claudio lie, who loved us so that speaking of her foulness washed it with tears? Hence from her, let her die." So, because Beatrice wasn't with her the night before her wedding day, Leonato takes that as evidence. Again, this is really kind of spurious evidence. Really, it doesn't hold water at all. We've got a sequence of rhetorical questions. Would the two princes lie, Don Pedro and Don John? Would Claudio lie, that loved her so much that he was crying when he talked about her? Well, these rhetorical questions tell us that Hero's reputation has been undone by the reputation and status of her accusers, which will always be higher than Hero's. Why? Because of the patriarchal structure of society. So you can see here the real damaging impact of a patriarchal structure, how a woman can become victimized and utilized and exploited with such ease because she has no voice of her own. However, in a moral society, or perhaps we should say in 1599, in a dominantly Christian society, there should be somebody who stands up for those individuals without a voice. And in the play, we've got Friar Francis, who's there to actually conduct the marriage ceremony, but ends up doing something much more manipulative, I suppose. So this is the start of his speech. "Hear me a little. For I have only been silent so long, and given way unto this course of fortune, by noting of the lady I have marked 1,000 blushing apparitions to start into her face. 1,000 innocent shames in angel whiteness beat away those blushes, and in her eye there hath appeared a fire to burn the errors that these princes hold against her maiden truth. Call me a fool. Trust not my reading nor my observations, which with experimental seal doth warrant the tenor of my book. Trust not my age, my reverence, calling, or divinity, if this sweet lady lie not guiltless here under some biting error." So the friar doesn't believe Hero is unfaithful, and he uses initially a semantic field of purity to express that by observing her, he has noticed these signs and symbols of her innocence. And then he does something really brave. He uses this imperative, "trust not," and with this imperative, the friar states his own reputation, which is demonstrated by the list I've highlighted in green here. He stakes his own reputation on Hero's innocence. You don't have to trust my reading, my observations, my age, my reverence, my calling as a priest, my divinity as a religious man, if I'm wrong, if this sweet lady is not guiltless. So he's staking his reputation on Hero's innocence, and therefore perhaps quite rarely, I would say, in Shakespeare's plays, embodying like a very faithful and good and moral religious figure. However, Leonato will not listen. So the friar has promised that she's innocent, but Leonato will not accept his promise. He says, Friar, it cannot be. Thou seest that all the grace that she hath left is that she will not add to her damnation a sin of perjury. She not denies it. Why seekest thou then to cover with excuse that which appears in proper nakedness? So Hero is still on the floor at this point, fainting, and Leonato's declarative here asserts that her silence is proof that she has enough good in her not to lie and pretend she's innocent. So perjury is when you lie under oath. And here Leonato is pointing out that because Hero isn't saying anything, at least she's got the integrity not to lie. So Leonato will not be persuaded of her innocence. Friar then turns to Hero, who at this point we must assume has awoken. Lady, what man is he you are accused of? And Hero responds, They know that do accuse me, I know none. If I know more of any man alive than that which maiden modesty doth warrant, let all my sins lack mercy. O my father, prove you that any man with me conversed at hours unmeet, or that I yesternight maintained the change of words with any creature, refuse me, hate me, torture me to death. So here, Hero says that she doesn't know any man more than maiden modesty warrants. Now, in the Bible, when people know each other, know is a kind of euphemistic verb that means have sex with. So even in the way that she describes her innocence, Hero is very careful with her language and very Christian in the way that she phrases herself. So she's pointing out here that she hasn't had any sex, any kind of relation outside of what would be permitted as a virgin. And she here, like the friar, so very much mirroring his phrase, promises that if she has done that and it is proved, her father is allowed to hurt her. If I have known more of any man alive than maiden modesty doth warrant, refuse me, hate me, torture me to death. So this tripling is quite hyperbolic, it's quite horrible, and it tells us that Hero accepts, she bows down to the patriarchal punishment her father would be allowed to give her if she had committed adultery or sex outside of wedlock, I should say. So you can see here the real threat of patriarchal violence that comes from a woman acting in a sort of sexualized fashion. Friar Francis maintains that something's happened that's gone wrong. He says there's some strange misprision in the princes. This means there's been a misunderstanding. Somehow Don John and Don Pedro have got the wrong end of the stick. And Benedict immediately works out that's not the case. The princes collectively haven't been misled. It's Don John. Benedict says, two of them have the very bent of honour, and if their wisdoms may be misled in this, the practice of it lives in John the Bastard, whose spirits toil in frame of villainies. So the verbs here are used to show Benedict rightly assumes Don Pedro and Claudio have been misled and manipulated by John. Now, obviously, it's at this point we could bring in the context of perceptions of bastards during the early modern period, wherein if people were born outside of wedlock, they were perceived to be antagonistic, they were perceived to be psychologically a dark character, they were perceived to be manipulative, Machiavellian, and certainly that's apparent in Benedict's immediate jump to the right conclusion, should I say, that Don John is the villain in this scenario. Leonato is starting to get a little bit doubtful. He's starting to think maybe he's jumped to the wrong conclusion himself. I know not. If they speak but truth of her, these hands shall tear her. If they wrong her honour, the proudest of them shall well hear of it. Time hath not yet so dried this blood of mine, nor age so eat up my invention, nor fortune made such havoc of my means, nor my bad life reft me so much of friends, but they shall find a weight in such a kind, both strength of limb and policy of mind, ability in means and choice of friends, to quit me of them thoroughly. So Leonato uses a lot of anaphora here. The first that I've highlighted in green is him saying what will happen if Hero is innocent and if she's guilty. So first he says, if they speak the truth of her, then he is going to tear her with his hands. So if Hero is not innocent, if she's guilty, she dies. But then he says, if they wrong her honour, the proudest of them shall well hear of it. What, they'll get into trouble? They'll be told off? Can you see how this doesn't seem fair? If Hero is guilty, she'll die. He'll kill her himself. If Hero is innocent, well, they'll well hear of it. You can see the patriarchal bias in Leonato's form of justice here. The anaphora that then follows, nor age, nor fortune, nor my bad life, is Leonato listing reasons why he can still hurt Don Pedro. He's still got lots of invention in his head. He's not gone senile. He's still got lots of money, lots of fortune. He can use his money to get back at them. He's not been so naughty and horrible in his life that he's lost loads of friends. He's got loads of people who will help him. So you can see the anaphora here is him kind of asserting his masculine dominance, asserting his patriarchal right to get revenge, even if Don Pedro is a prince. So this is a kind of assertion of masculinity, this speech. Friar Francis, seeing this kind of transition in Leonato's thinking, encourages him to pause a while and let my counsel sway you in this case. Your daughter, here the prince is left for dead. Let her a while be secretly kept in, and publish it that she is dead indeed. Maintain a mourning ostentation, and on your family's old monument hang mournful epitaphs, and do all rites that appertain unto a burial. Leonato is very kind of confused by this. Well, what shall become of this? What will this do? And Friar Francis starts to come up with a plot. Marry, this well carried shall on her behalf change slander to remorse. That is some good. But not for that dream I on this strange course, but on this travail look for greater birth. So the imperatives here at the top is Friar Francis creating a plot and a scheme of his own, which is going to contradict the effects of Don John's plot and scheme. Essentially what they're going to do is pretend that Hero is dead. Now, if you're thinking this sounds familiar, you are very right to think that. This is a plot that was used in Romeo and Juliet, which we think was written about 4 years earlier than Much Ado About Nothing. So he's reusing this plot of a priest intervening in a romantic sort of, what's the word? A romantic catastrophe, let's call it that. And he's intervening with this peculiar deception of faking the woman's death. The purpose of this is that the plan will turn the horrible gossip about Hero into expressions of sadness. Okay, so that's the plan for the future, and a promise for the future is called a commissive. However, he does say that this is not just the end. He thinks there's actually like more that they could get out of a plan like this. This could have a greater birth. There could be something better that comes out of this than just getting rid of the gossip and making people grieve. So Friar Francis has more to say as the speech goes on. So the first part of the plot is that, quote, she dying, as it must so be maintained, upon the instant that she was accused, shall be lamented, pitied, and excused of every hearer. It so falls out that what we have we prize not the worth whilst we enjoy it, but being lacked and lost, why then we rack the value, then we find the virtue that possession would not show us whilst it was ours. So the tripling here is Claudio and Messina, the place, the whole of Messina's reaction to her apparent death. At first they'll feel sorry for her, then they'll start to think that maybe somebody wronged her. So there's going to be this kind of transition in how people view Hero. He then uses a metaphor describing Hero as a prize. He compares her to a prize that you don't value while you have, but when you lose it, you feel sorry, you feel the lack of it. And I think it's worth looking at the language here. By calling her a prize, referring to her worth and her value, essentially Shakespeare here is reminding us that reputation is essentially your value as a wife. And if you don't have a reputation, you would have no value as a potential wife. So he's all about here giving her more value back, having lost that in the course of the wedding scene so far. He goes on to say, and so will it fare with Claudio. When he shall hear she died upon his words, the idea of her life shall sweetly creep into his study of imagination, and every lovely organ of her life shall come apparelled in more precious habit, more moving, delicate, and full of life, into the eye and prospect of his soul, than when she lived indeed. Then shall he mourn, if ever love had interest in his liver, and wish he had not so accursed her, no, though he thought his accusation true. So the point is here that the friar is arguing Claudio will fall in love with her all over again once she is dead. Now, I think there's something a bit disturbing about this. One, I don't like Claudio very much right now because of the horrible way that he publicly shamed Hero without any real evidence. So he's a bit of an unpleasant chap already. But this idea that he would fall in love with her again once she's dead really speaks to how the courtly love kind of ideology has flaws. When she exists only in his imagination, so not in real life, if she's dead, Claudio can have an idealized, a perfect version of Hero. And then, once she's idealized again, he will fall back in love with her. And to my mind, as a modern reader, I find this very disturbing, that you can only love somebody who is perfect and idealized. And I think Shakespeare doesn't like this idea either, because all the way through the play, he's not advocating for courtly love. He's showing us the superficiality and the transitory nature of courtly love. Real love is combative and difficult, and it has obstacles. And that's Benedict and Beatrice's love. So we can see here, if we look at the scene holistically all the way to the end, which we won't do today, Benedict and Beatrice's love is the real one. Claudio and Hero's love is deeply problematic. This is the end of Friar Francis's speech. Let this be so, and doubt not but success will fashion the event in better shape than I can lay it down in likelihood. But if all aim but this be levelled false, the supposition of the lady's death will quench the wonder of her infamy, and if it sort not well, you may conceal her, as best befits her wounded reputation in some reclusive and religious life, out of all eyes, tongues, minds, and injuries. Infamy is it's like being infamous, isn't it? It's like a bad reputation. It's being notorious, being known for the wrong reasons. And here, Shakespeare uses the verb quench, which basically is used usually to put out a fire. So the verb quench compares her awful reputation, her infamy, with a fire that needs to be put out. If the plan fails, that's okay, says Friar Francis. You may conceal her in some reclusive and religious life. Now, the technique here is hendiades, which you only need to know if you're super interested in language and you're interested in learning new terms. But if you look at that alliteration that's emphasizing it, perhaps that's a little bit easier to spot. So this hendiades, adjective plus noun, is what they will do if the plan fails. They'll just stick her in a nunnery. And if you're thinking, oh, that seems like a very peculiar thing to do, not really. This happens a lot in Shakespeare plays. The idea of hiding somebody away in a nunnery is an idea that comes up in a few of his texts. So what's interesting there to me is if the plan fails, they're not going to, seek justice. They're just going to hide her away, which again demonstrates patriarchal bias, a lack of investment in the female identity and the female experience. Benedict responds at the end of Friar Francis's plan with, Signor Leonato, let the friar advise you. And though you know my inwardness and love is very much unto the prince and Claudio, yet by mine honour I will deal in this as justly and secretly as your soul should with your body. So Benedict expresses here in green that I've highlighted where his loyalty will lie. It is with the prince and Claudio. However, you can see here this embedded clause, by mine honour. Benedict at this point, he's getting so many hero protagonist points here. He's just doing everything right because he's become this kind of good moral man by falling in love with Beatrice. And in this embedded clause, he is pointing out that it is more honourable to act in hero's favour than it is to just follow his loyalties blindly. So we can really see we're positioned with Benedict in this scene, and we really celebrate his morality and sensitivity within this scene. After hearing about the plot of the friar, Leonato says, being that I flow in grief, the smallest twine may lead me. And Friar Francis says, just before they leave and just have Beatrice and Benedict on stage alone, Friar Francis says, "'Tis well consented, presently away. For to strange sores strangely they strain the cure. Come, lady, die to live. This wedding day perhaps is but prolonged. Have patience and endure." So Leonato's dialogue here includes the metaphor that smallest twine may lead me. Twine just means like a smallest piece of string, okay? And at this point, we do, despite everything he said, despite how horrific his language has been when describing his daughter, we do pity Leonato because by the end of the scene he is reduced. All of his strength has been spent in the outpouring of his emotion, and now he's just an old man. He can barely walk. And so you can imagine the kinetics of this, the body language. People have to help him off the stage. He's so reduced by what he's experienced. Weirdly, though, I do have to just study this last line of Friar Francis's before we go. Friar Francis says, to hero, die to live, so pretend to die so that you can live in future. This wedding day perhaps is but prolonged, have patience. That's a bit strange. So the alliteration here emphasizes the real goal of Friar Francis's plot. Ideally, he won't just save Hero's reputation. He might actually get Claudio to marry her again. Which is peculiar because the question would be, why would you still want to marry Claudio when he's done this to you? And I suppose the answer would inevitably be because he still has status and power, and that is the end point of a marriage if we're taking marriage to be a transaction. So a bit of a cynical move at the end of this portion of the scene. Okay, I apologise, but I didn't set homework yesterday and I should have done. I'm going to give you a homework that is counting for 2 homework. So this will be your Monday homework and your Friday homework, and you've got all the way until next Monday to get this done. Use quotations annotated in the video to complete your 2-sided key quotation sheet, which you started last lesson. I suggest to do this, you take home your playtext and the key quotation sheet. You shouldn't have stuck that in yet. You've got till Monday the 6th. Please leave your exercise books in class for me to mark your previous homework. I have put this video and indeed a copy of the sheet on class charts, so if you are unsure at any point as to what you need to do, you can look at the resources on class charts. Okay, thank you very much. Bye, Year 10.